Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our special edition of Consultants Corner. This week, instead of doing our usual purchasing assistance, we're jumping in and acknowledging that 1 week and 2 hours from now, the State Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes grant will be due. We realize that you must have quite a few questions. And today, instead of doing a presentation, we're going to be answering your questions. So please put your questions into the chat box and we will try to get to everyone's questions. We have, of course, Ilya Umansky, all the way from Hong Kong, joining us. Dov Horowitz, of course, our regular, and a special guest star, Jeremy Paulson, our cybersecurity expert, who will be here to answer your cybersecurity questions. We're going to try to get all of your questions answered. We also have Bill Hayes, our Westchester Bronx security director, who's here to jump in whenever we have any other questions. So without further ado, let's turn it over to you and your question. Dov, do you want to say a few words?
Good morning, everyone. I apologize if I have a choppy connection today. We have a lot of the team members on board to make sure questions are answered. As we wait for questions, the reason we did this was because our regional security directors, like Bill Hayes, who's on the call today, was fielding a lot of questions from people applying about budgeting. How much is this? How much is that? We didn't make specific presentation today. We wanted to be available and live to talk through your situations because there's no exact same tool, right? There's general costs we can put behind a door or a camera system, but you might need something different than the next guy, and those variables, how you calculate it. We won't be able to make the exact pricing, but this is to give you a general number. As we wait for any questions, if there are some, just one thing, and we'll jump into the first question. Let's clarify for this grant. We're talking about the New York State Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes grant that is due next Tuesday, February 28th. Your application is due. That means you have your assessments. That means you have your pre-qualification and then your application through the grants management system. If those are new terms to you, we have previous recordings on how to do the application. Also recognize every location can do up to 3 projects per location for $50,000, plus a cyber project for $50,000. We know there's been a lot of questions. We know Jeremy has been churning through assessments for our community, but recognize that each 50 bucket, though, let's say you have one building and you want to do 3 projects besides the cyber project, that you can only max each project to 50. So for example, if for some reason you need $100,000 in a camera system, which is crazy, it's an example. For this grant, you can only use up to one of your 3 projects, so a max of 50,000. So with that, and we're going to keep most of today to budgeting. If there's other questions that come in, I see there's some other ones. We'll try to address it, but we want to make sure, as advertised, we stick to the budgeting. So the first question, one of my favorite areas, Ilya, if we're ready to jump in, and I'll start. What's a budget cost for exterior forced entry doors and interior? And what about blast-resistant glass? Okay, so let's kind of talk about those pieces. So if you're really looking for a real forced entry rating is a certified and tested capability, right? The standards you'll find in the field are anywhere from 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute. There's bigger ratings as well. What we've seen, especially, please recognize, due to supply chain issues and availability, prices are rising. Also, is your door a double leaf door, right? 2 doors? Or is it a single door? Is it going to be a solid door, or are you going to have some design to it, right? There are vendors that can make that for you. If you're looking for really just a steel door that has this rating, including all the hardware that goes with it, the hinges, the locks, right? It's the whole picture. You have a great door, but if it can come right off the hinges, what good did we do? You have a great door, but the lock isn't to the same standard. Have you really made a forced entry door? I personally, for a basic door, what Ilya likes to call key turn, right? Is that the term, right? Turnkey. Turnkey. That basically meaning the install is complete and has everything you need. So you don't have to go back and forth with the vendor. For a basic solid door, forced entry rated in the 8,000 to 10,000 range for a basic, simple forced entry door. The similar would be for an interior, because we're talking, it's not the matter of that it's exterior or interior, it's the rating of the door. And then the nuances become the design. Are you going to add a blast resistant glass panel to it, which can add a couple thousand? If you want it, so this question is additional cost to add blast one-way security glass window. I'm not going to get into the one-way or not, but let's talk about the actual bullet resistant capability. Depending on how much of the door, if we're talking a 2x3 panel versus the whole length of the door, give it a couple extra thousand. I think if we're talking about a one panel door at 8,000, if it was basic turnkey, then maybe we'd get into the almost $10,000 range. It's got to be cut. It's got to be fitted. It's got to arrive. Glass is even slower than doors these days. So, Ilya, anything else to add on doors?
Right. I just want to point out that what Dov is explaining, you should keep in mind that there are labor hours and labor costs involved and included in these types of prices. So when bidders provide their proposals to you, please make sure that you understand both the actual cost of the unit, the door itself, and the associated hardware and frame, but also please ask how many hours the bidder is proposing to spend on installation. For a typical door, you're looking probably for a day's worth of work to install, and make sure that everything is calibrated and everything is set in place and so on. Might take longer. And also the hourly rate, right? In different jurisdictions, different municipalities, vendors will charge slightly different rates. So just be aware of that these budgets that you're going to see, they're inclusive of both the unit and associated hardware, as well as associated labor costs.
And I think we'll probably get a few more door questions. That's always been the part that most of us are unfamiliar with. Let's also point out for those of you on call, a double leaf door, ideally, single leaf is easier to protect. It's solid into the frame. You have a double leaf door and it has to either latch into itself or maybe a center mullion. But to do that to these capabilities, we're talking now at $20,000. If you have multiple of those doors in your exterior, multiply it accordingly. I think if you're looking at doors, I would max out one of your projects, because at the end of the day, we both know that the hate crimes grant, at least under the New York State Division of Homeland Security, when they did it, they're a little more flexible with moving funds. We still don't completely know under the new agency, DCJS, Division of Criminal Justice Services, how flexible they'll be. But likely, I would over budget. Don't try to get exactly. If I'm saying, oh, Dove said it's 8K and we're adding some glass, want to make sure labor, now we're at 12,000 for one door, I would still give it a little buffer. If by the time you're approved on this grant, and who knows where supply chain things will be, it could be further. So don't forget that. And also don't forget, we don't want to replace one door and then the next door it hasn't been upgraded at all. So I would make sure to think comprehensively there. But Matt, you have a couple, unless you really are strapped for a lot of projects, I would dedicate as much as you can to it if you're doing a door hardening project, to door hardening, and from there kind of spread it around. Again, if you missed our door piece, please, David is recording this session and we'll have on our website. All right, next question. Ilya, ready to move on?
I think there's a set of questions above that question, Dov. So just let's make sure that we don't miss those. It starts with, what is the general cost for fixing a gate around the cemetery?
That's where I'm up to. Yep.
Yeah.
So questions about, I'm assuming, fencing. Fencing is very broad, and I'm going to actually turn this over to Ilya. You can get a basic chain link fence, and it's going to be measured by the foot, how you roll it out. Or you're looking for a security rated steel fence, right, where the posts you can't really climb when they're separated. So it really is a wide range, anywhere from, low end, maybe at the $50 a foot to $250. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Ilya. Now, if you're talking about adding gates to it, pedestrian gates, vehicle gates, that changes the dynamic completely, especially if you're looking for like security ratings of those vehicle gates. We're talking about a cemetery here. I know David has a lot of familiarity with cemeteries. Ilya, if you want to add anything about a gate, maybe fencing at a cemetery.
All to say, only whatever location you're trying to apply your upgrades to, please make sure that you're not just fixing a gate in an otherwise low-end fence. That doesn't meet the security standards. Okay, so please make sure that you're looking at the recommendations for the minimum height of your fence, the materials that need to be used, right? So please make sure first that your fence itself is sturdy enough and meets the basic criteria for what would be called a security fence. And in our documentation, we provide a lot of guidance on what that should look like. So visit the website, engage with your regional security manager, they'll guide you as well. Now, to the point of the difference between fixing and installing something new, right? Now, if you're fixing an existing gate, right, that's time and materials. You call up a vendor and they come out, or if you want to bid it out, that's fine too, if it's part of a larger project. That likely will be a combination of factors. So it's very challenging for us to give you an estimate on how to fix one. We don't know what's broken. So it could be a hinge, or it could be the entire gate. Right, but you're looking again at a couple of $1,000s at least to get this implementation done. And keep in mind, some of it is going to be hardware, and some of it is going to be hours from a contractor that's going to come to your site and spend, let's say, half a day to a day fixing this gate, depending obviously on the extent of what needs to be fixed. And please don't forget that if you're only fixing a gate in an otherwise inferior fence, you're not doing yourselves any favors.
And I'll add also, sometimes we think almost too complex, right? If we're talking about a whole gate around a whole cemetery, well, first of all, what is that distance? Let's understand from a simple starting point, right? Just like doors, how many doors, right? Where are the doors? Same thing with the fence. What is our square footage? And then the type of design we want. Right, ideally, like Lilios mentioned, always please go back to our assessments and the recommendations we put there. So we're talking a 6, ideally 8-foot fence for security reasons, and then it's kind of, you do the math from there. Even if you over budget 150 to 200 per foot, it'll come out to a good amount of cost. And if anything, we'd rather be over budgeted than under budgeted for the purpose of these grants. And then you can ideally move. If your priority project is the fence, put a substantial amount for that project. That's my main recommendation for this grant, so that you have that flexibility to make sure you can do a comprehensive project. I'm going to just try to filter.
The next one is for costs for security cameras. We can quickly address that, and I suppose I can jump in for a moment. Typical installation of a security camera, as I said, also pretty much follows the same methodology. It's the hardware, licenses, programming, cabling, and additional peripherals, if you will, the head-end software, computing equipment if it's necessary. So all in all, it's not just the cost of the camera as a unit. Okay, so please understand that if you're just simply putting in a camera, then my question to you is, okay, who's paying for cable to connect the camera to something that's going to record? How much does the recorder cost? Right? How much does the software cost? So there are additional costs that are necessary in order to make the system work, right? So a typical camera installation, like let's say per camera, if it includes licenses, if it includes the software and everything else, you're looking at a minimum of $1,500. Now, that doesn't mean that each camera itself costs $1,500. Right? The camera will likely run about $400, roughly $500 range. And then the additional expenses that are associated with software and so on. So that's the typical range that you should be planning for. So if you're going to stick with $1,500 per camera, that would include cabling, would include basic software, license, and the recording equipment, right? But I suppose you're not going to be installing just one. So again, make those calculations carefully. There's a second question here that says security cameras that don't require Wi-Fi. Jeremy could probably jump in. I could tell you that I'm not a big fan of an idea of running cameras on Wi-Fi.
I agree.
You can ask, you can possibly have access to cameras over the web and have a remote connection to your camera system to view the footage or live video, right? But we don't recommend cameras running on a Wi-Fi network. Okay, so they're vulnerable. So I'll pass this back to Jeremy because I know you have quite a few thoughts on that.
Well, being a good, properly paranoid cybersecurity person, IoT devices and cameras are one of them, have the most notoriously bad record from the point of view of security. If you put them on a Wi-Fi network, they're potentially vulnerable to infiltration by anybody driving around, pretty much, and can pick up the signal. I would not advise it. I think hardwiring is the way to go. And I think even better than that, you should keep the camera network away from the rest of your network, either through some virtual file server or something equivalent, because you do not want this mixing with the rest of your files. There are just too many ways they can be compromised.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Very good advice. Thank you.
And I'm going to add in on that, whether it's this grant or the federal NSGP, we're talking about high security situations. And the systems that we're always recommending are commercial, high security, and just like Jeremy and Ilya have been saying, if it's not hardwire, it brings additional vulnerabilities, consistency issues, and everything else with it. So we're really talking about something you want to have hardwired into the system. We don't use the term CCTV anymore, closed circuit television. They're networked. It's inherently not CCTV, but that doesn't mean we should just totally open up the whole world and put it on wireless. Good question. I see a question about software. So in terms of we're talking about, and it similarly, where does a VPN fall? It's again, we're talking more about the pricing for certain items versus how to do the budget item in the application. I think if you follow the categories, there's only a few categories, and Ilya, myself, and Jeremy were looking at the budget section of the RFP, meaning of your application. So again, as far as my understanding, this will still all fall under equipment. It's just now you're requesting cyber equipment. And I'll turn it over to Jeremy if you want to add anything to that.
VPNs are really cheap, depending upon the amount of bandwidth you want, which is, I think, usually the way they price this. Basically, it's just an end-to-end encrypted channel for communications. And they have various techniques for going about it. It's generally recommended. You'll often find it attached to even the most basic endpoint protection solutions. You turn it on, you turn it off, whatever suits you. Sometimes these VPNs can really slow you down. But you've got to make that determination. Any good backups offsite system will have a VPN built into it so that it's end-to-end encrypted, so that when you are transmitting your backup to the offsite location, it cannot be intercepted or read by anybody who might be attempting to listen in. So, VPNs are cheap. You can often find them packaged with other things.
And just to clarify on the question, supplies usually in that supplies line in your application is for like training supplies. This would still fall under equipment that you're purchasing through the grant. So just recognize that. And I think if you go through our original how to apply webinar, we talk about which are the eligible sections you would actually use. For example, if you're looking at your SCAHC application, and David, please step in as needed. Right, there's only a few categories that this grant that is eligible to our applicants, to us. Right, there's a personnel section and fringe benefits, but this grant is not allowed for us to hire officers, to hire guards, or pay fringe benefits. So those are just categories that don't exist. And supplies are usually to support training, or for some reason you needed some sort of supplies to do that. For this grant, it would, for the most part, everything you purchase, even software, is my understanding, would be under equipment.
But if you hire a consultant for your security, for your cyber, that's a consultant line.
Thank you. Just one quick thing I noticed someone asked about, not to take it off the line from budgeting, where is this in e-grants? This is not, the hate crimes application is not in e-grants. Just to keep things confusing, the state is using grants management system, a separate system, which is very similar, GMS. Please see our website. David has put so much materials on, including our slide decks and the webinars about how to apply for this one. This grant is not applied through e-grants. It is GMS, Grants Management System. Earlier, Bill, you see some more questions coming in. I know there's a bunch coming through. Anything applicable?
And I just want to add, if we missed your question, would you please type it at the bottom of the list so that we can eventually get to it? We might have missed it as we're scrolling, so apologies in advance.
Let me jump in. There were a couple of questions about how to fill out X or Y. You know, number one, you should know that this agency is very opaque to us too. So we're trying to give you the best answers possible. I just posted in the chat a link to the GMS application manual. So if you have specific questions on how to fill in, you know, for example, project summary description and program purpose, those are the kinds of things that you can find right in the GMS application manual. And the same thing with budget. What we advise is to post the you know, when you're opening up the grant management system, open it up in one window, open up the manual in the second window, and go through page by page, screen by screen. They often, it's not as good as eGrants tutorial, but it's what we have, and it's the best information that you can have. And if you follow that, you won't be led astray.
Two questions I'm going to jump into, and then back to cameras, because I see a couple questions, even one with some good specifics. So having Ilya, maybe he can walk through that one when we get there in a moment. But two questions, one very straightforward. So the SCAHC and the DCJS application is one and the same. DCJS, Division of Criminal Justice Services, is an agency. They are the agency that oversees and implements the State Hate Crimes Grant, the SCAHC. So the SCAHC is the grant, DCJS is the agency. So not one and the same, but it's that one world, just to clarify. How detailed does the budget? Sometimes, depending if you're buying a few items, they want to see how many, you know, your estimated number of doors or cameras times a rough estimate like Ilya gave you, and that should give you your kind of total budget. But they're not asking for every element of your system. Plus, the reality is, till you get quotes and budgets, there's so many changes and nuances of every site. What's the wall material? You know, how far is it? What is there an outdoor camera and indoor camera? There's these nuances that till you get an actual quote, you won't have. So I would always budget safely, budget a little high, using our general estimates to give you a number so you can target. On that note of the camera note, I'm going to ask you this question, Ilya. I'll throw it at you. How much, I don't like to use the term CCTV. I think that's archaic terminology. Most systems are closed circuit, but how much would a camera surveillance system, including the NVR and 32 cameras, run? You're on. If you had to estimate that whole project, and recognize, everyone, it's an approximation. There's a lot of variables that we don't know not being there.
32 cameras, probably in the vicinity of about 50 to 60,000 US. Yeah. The reason why I say this is because you can get a vendor that will come and say, I'll do it for 20. Okay. Now, if they offer to install a 32 camera system for $20,000, ask yourself a question: what kind of technology am I getting? So JCRC runs a very, very good service, and where they're subscribers to a very good service, which is called IPVM. No later than yesterday, IPVM came out with a new report about a new brand of cameras that are made in China that look like will be banned in a year or two. no later than that. Okay, and so vendors like, I guess, maximizing the number of hardware they sell and trying to sell it at a big bargain basement prices. Okay, you get what you pay for. Okay, and so not only can you end up with bad tech, but you can also end up eventually with a system that may never receive grant money for upgrades and may not even be covered by a grant, because that system may have either components or in and of itself may have been banned by the US government, and therefore grants will not be applicable. So the reason why I'm giving you such high estimates, right, is because to install a 32 camera system takes quite a few hours in labor, materials that are peripheral to the system, calibration, software, a properly sized recording equipment, right? Some switches, if you know, assuming that the camera will run on power over Ethernet. And so sorry for throwing some technical terms there, but there will be a lot of peripheral equipment besides what you will see in your spaces, or like the little dome cameras or the bullet cameras, whatever that may be, right? Consider for a 32 camera system that you'll be at around, let's say, $50,000 to $60,000.
You know, just to jump in on Ilya's point, in the last 2 weeks, two of our regional security directors told me that they were in brand new buildings and they found dozens of banned cameras installed in those new buildings because they went out to bid. You know, vendors can get these cameras very, very cheap because they're banned. And you know, what do the institution just doesn't know, doesn't have the expertise. That's what we're here for. Bill Hayes told me a story a couple of years ago that he was in a JCC, and he's, you know, initially he saw the equipment said Honeywell on it, but it was one of the banned brands, you know, when he looked at the equipment itself. So it's something that you have to worry about. And, you know, that's why we're here to help. So feel free to reach out to your regional security director.
And I think we covered a lot of camera stuff, which is important. It's a program or it's a system that a lot of people start with. It has its elements, you know, it has its strengths if used right. But like Ilya was saying, if that was the budget and he's estimating at 50 or 60, and we know for the hate crimes grant that your max per project is 50, you're naturally maxing out your $50,000, one of your three 50,000s on cameras. So go full throttle and give you that ability to be flexible. If you can't get as many cameras as you wanted, you know, you apply for a future year for another grant, probably not the hate crimes grant because they won't allow you to go to another category. But at least you can get your project pretty far ahead. So that's kind of what ties back to the limitations of this grant. I saw there was a question about also the NSGP. The budgeting applies across the board. Our costs apply. We will have a session next week, David will mention, on NSGP and application, but for now we're going to stick to budgeting, which applies to either grant. I want to turn, because I see a couple questions on electronic access control, as well as
Dog, let me just jump in for a second and share this. There was a question on the banned system so far. And this is the list that we have, Ilya, beside the new one that isn't banned yet.
The new one is called UNV, UniView, UNV.
You know, these are the brands and the logos that you would be seeing.
Right. And the service Ilya mentioned about researching is called IPVM. IPVM.
Now, I wouldn't recommend, if you don't have background in security technologies, I wouldn't recommend that you subscribe to it. It's quite technical. Please reach out to your regional security director if you need more assistance with that, or any more updates on what banned equipment is out there and what reports are coming through, because IPVM constantly updates their research, and they run well ahead of the government bans, but their reports are highly regarded. They're globally referred to. UK government is doing much of the same. So they're a very reliable predictor, if you will, of what brands might be banned in the near future.
And the UK government cites IPVM all the time. So all of our regional security directors have subscriptions. And so if you say, I want to know, can you get me the camera comparison book? They can get you the camera comparison book, and which will help you do apples to apples comparisons of the various cameras, and how people rate them.
I actually saw somebody, Janice Alderman just mentioned that they have a quote for UniView equipment. So I just want to tell you, I already just recently, in the last maybe 24 hours, sent an email to one of the vendors that's bidding on another site that I'm working with. They're bidding UniView as well. And I told them, you need to change it because we don't want to take the risk. So, and here is the very interesting part. As much as we can talk about technology, right? Vendors sometimes are also not very scrupulous. And they go, and I had a vendor admit to me, Ilya, we go for budget. We go for where we can make the biggest bang for our buck. Okay. And so wherever they can make the best profit, they don't really care whether a brand is going to be banned in a year. They'll be happy to go and replace the whole system for you. Right. But that's unethical behavior. Okay. Please make sure that for whatever quotes, right, whoever gives you whatever equipment, right, check with the regional security manager, just to make sure that this equipment is not on the banned list. And even if it isn't, get the attestation letter from the vendor that none of the technology they're selling you is currently banned by the US government. Because if any component, if any one single item in that system is banned, potentially you may have to replace the whole system.
Very hard to work around. And let's bring this home even a little further. If you were to use one of these products under NSGP funding, for example, you will not be reimbursed. And we've seen it happen. So that's where this comes home to roost. So we just recommend staying away from it. I mean, if we're talking security posture and security systems, and understanding it's not that just banning them for a random reason. There's vulnerabilities with these systems that once they're networked, etc., that you have to be mindful of. And you got to think that whole comprehensive picture of securing your facility. All right, with that, I want to turn to electronic access control systems, also a very important piece of any security system, because you can have the greatest door in the world, 15-minute, 60-minute forced entry, but if it's not locked and you don't have a good access control policy procedure in systems, doors wide open, and we've done almost nothing. So let's start thinking about how to price that. We'll try to go through a couple questions. We have one specifically. I'll read it, give a comment, and then turn it to Ilya. But I see a question: how much should we budget to electrify 6 doors and tie them into our access system? There's a couple components what that includes in terms of electrifying. A. B, I'll give you an example. We just on a project I've been working on for 2 commercial grade 1 mortise lock handle sets. 2 of them cost $2,500 just for the lock, just for the handle. So there's costs that go in. It's not just the reader. It's got to be wired. It's got to be connected. It's got to be the whole picture. So with that, I'll turn to Ilya.
Thanks, Dov. Yeah, you're definitely quoting correct numbers, because keep in mind, and this is where again we're so grateful that you find the time to speak with us and to give us these questions, because the distinctions that our clients sometimes forget to make is that if you go and Google how much a mortise lock costs, you're going to find prices anywhere between $150 to $1,000, right? But that's just for that device that arrives in a box with a manual. Good luck installing it. You can't do it yourself, right? And if you can, you must be a certified locksmith, right? So the labor cost is also added, has to be added. And then to Dov's point, electrification also gets added. So to go back to this question, so you're saying that how much should we budget to electrify 6 doors and tie them to our access control system? We don't know but what you mean by electrification. Let me explain. Electrification could mean electrified locks, and that's it. Electrification could also mean that you want to put the rest of access control devices on it. So that could entail a contact. It could entail potentially, let's say, a magnetic lock or a door strike or a mortise lock, like Dov said, and a reader. Okay, now, a total setup for the door, considering cable that runs to a data processing panel or a data gathering panel, is anywhere for a single leaf door, right, with the electrified lock, with a reader, with a contact, and with cabling that runs to the DGP, is around $3,500. Okay, so that's just a rough estimate for you. Okay, depending on the type of the door that you're working with, depending on the type of equipment or a set of equipment that you're looking to install, or what the contractor is recommending you, that's going to be a rough midpoint that you're going to be looking at. Now, that doesn't only include hardware, it also includes the labor hours, it includes programming, right? So roughly $3,500. Now, please make sure to ask contractors to break that out for you, okay? How much per unit of hardware? How much for hours of installation, right? How much for any peripheral materials, cabling, whatever. How much for termination of that cabling? And the full setup and programming and whatever. So make sure they break that out for you so you can understand what you're paying for. Because we see a lot of proposals that say, we will give you 6 doors electrified and we will sell it to you for $5,400. What are you paying for? What's entailed? Maybe it's a bad system, okay? I had a contractor just recently who decided to include pricing for running a single long cable from the 3rd floor in the building all the way down to the ground floor, right? Whereas that's not a standard practice in New York, not even in normal installations. I don't care whether it's New York or somewhere else, right? That's not a normal practice. You typically run it horizontally, you terminate it, and then you run it in a riser down to another termination point, right? Where you go vertical and then you go horizontal again, right? So there are these catch points where you have to understand how to run that cable. And so instead of a budget of, let's say, $2,000 for cable, that contractor hit my client with $5,000 or $6,000 for cable. Okay, so that eats away, because of bad design, it eats away from the rest of the equipment that you're buying. So I just wanted to elaborate on that a bit. Sorry, though. Back to you.
No sorries at all. So let's just do a summary of access control, and then I want to turn to some cybersecurity questions because we have Jeremy today. Let's say the whole system was 6 readers, a normal type size synagogue we're talking about. So that means you need the software, you need the cabling, you need the reader, you need the electrified lock, whether it's in the frame or the latch, right? Or it's the strike. There's different ways to do it. But let's say a basic system that at least locks the door, and right now we have nothing. How would you estimate that cost at?
For 6 doors, yeah, we're probably going to be talking about, if it's a bundle, yeah, probably between 12 and 20,000. It depends on the system, depends on what's being sold. So I'd say on the low end, it's going to be about 12K. On the high end, it's going to be around $20,000.
I agree with that number. Thank you. Yeah. So that, and again, the question was, it sounded like there was an existing system. It's a little different. We're talking about a new system. All right. With that, I know I'm jumping a couple questions and hopefully we will get to everything, but the cyber piece is new to a lot of people. Jeremy, I'll read the question to you and kind of open the floor to you to put out some of the high level things that you think people should be thinking about in their cybersecurity posture and what that cost may be. I'll read the question. We just received our cybersecurity vulnerability assessment, so we are just now learning about what systems to apply for. How would you recommend pricing it out? Just to do some internet research, or Jeremy, maybe how you can short circuit it for them and get them in the right direction?
Well, like so many broad questions, there are so many different ways to answer it. And increasingly in tech, it's become a process of, what alternative do you go for? Just yesterday, I was looking at firewalls, and the firewall is a basic front end for any network. The typical mechanism has usually been to have a hardware discrete firewall that you plug into your network at the internet front end. Increasingly, however, there are software solutions that are just as effective, maybe more effective, and the pricing is all over the place. Big important thing about a firewall: if it's not maintained, if it's not properly set up, it's worthless. Honest to God, you've just flushed thousands of dollars right down the toilet. Don't do it. It must be properly set up. You've got to change all the factory set passwords, because otherwise that's like saying, hi, all the hackers out there know the factory set passwords. You don't change them, bang, they're in. And so, it's all over the place. Hardware, for a hardware firewall, we're talking $700 for a small business, and this is just the hardware cost. You're going to need to spend probably about another $1,000, maybe $2,000 to keep the thing, to install it properly, to keep it maintained, because an unmaintained firewall is pointless.
Jeremy, let me jump in for just a second. When
Sure.
we say maintained, all of this equipment is software based.
Not all of it. A lot of it's firmware based.
So
if you're
what
talking
you
about the
need
hardware
to do,
stuff.
well, yeah, but what you have to subscribe to the manufacturer, who then sends you on a regular basis any updates.
Mhm. You
You
got to buy the license.
What? You got to buy the license.
You got to
have
buy the
to
license, and that's
for video surveillance systems, for access control systems, everything you have to buy the license. And
Yeah, license
that's
is
what Jeremy means by maintaining. You
Yeah,
have to not only pay the money, but then you have to follow up and do it. And, sometimes, the reality is, even if you set it to automatically update, the updates don't work. Someone has to be monitoring that to make sure that the updates are working and they actually do update. Otherwise, the latest and greatest vulnerability is out there, and someone can go and, tap into your system and take over everything. So sorry, Jeremy, I just wanted to kind of make that clear.
okay. A license for a firewall, and this is just one thing, okay, out of the whole spectrum of devices, software, et cetera, that you have for cybersecurity. It's going to cost you $1,000 to $2,000 a year.
And by the way, the grant will pay for 2 years of that.
Right.
So you submit for 2 years of the license.
If you're dealing with older computers and it's time to replace them, or because those older computers cannot support modern operating systems, which I've seen happen, there's a lot of Windows 7's machines out there, and frankly, they should be taken out and shot. They are open, gaping wounds. An older computer may not be able to support Windows 10. An older computer will probably certainly not be able to support Windows 11, which is what Microsoft is moving to. I think maybe Windows 10 is maybe a year or two more left before they finally start phasing it out. A new desktop can cost you $600 to about $1,000, depending on how long you want it to operate. You buy cheap, you're getting a short-lived computer, either because the hardware is old or you're buying something reconditioned. Forget it, not a good choice. Buy new and get it up to date, because it'll last you longer. Backups. Software, okay, let's go back to software. Laptops will cost $4,000 to $3,000. Again, depends on, how much firepower you want. Laptops tend to be a bit more expensive because the engineering involved is much more heat critical. you ever use a laptop and have it sort of fry your thighs, you know what I'm talking about. Then getting to software depends on the vendor, depends on how many licenses you buy. Backup strategy. A network attached storage device, which is something I would recommend for everybody, will cost you $500 or so, depending on the size of the storage you're going to use. You're going to need software to do that. That's going to cost. That's got to be set up. Then you've got off-site backups. I recommend both an on-site and an off-site. Off-site is usually priced according to the size of your storage. There are a couple of excellent websites that review all these products and can give you good guidance. I recommend g2.com, and I recommend the Gartner stuff, which is usually pretty fairly available, even though it's pretty much a subscription service. These will give you really good guidance as to what are the good products out there and will lead you to make some good judgments. Cybersecurity, endpoint protection is critical. I've seen a lot of places that do not have it, or they rely on Windows Defender, which I think, quite frankly, is Swiss cheese. You get what you pay for. Windows Defender is free. For that read, they're not going to give you their best. They'll update it when they wish to, when they don't wish to. It's not going to use the most advanced detection technology, and it probably will not, in the event that one of your machines gets infected, it will not cut it out of the network. It will not isolate it or quarantine it, or whatever word you want to use. And that's something you want, because you want to cut this infection right out of your network as soon as possible. For that, you need a top-notch modern solution that has that capability. You're going to pay more for it, but it's worth it. I've seen too many institutions of ours ransomware or otherwise malwared simply because they didn't have a proper endpoint protection solution installed and available. Other than that, cybersecurity education, which is typically offered in a package. Some of it's available out there free. I don't think it's valuable unless you have something called phishing simulation. Phishing simulation means they see what's out there in terms of phishing that's being done to entice your staff into clicking on things they shouldn't, and it will send out false messages and seeing who falls for it. This reinforces the training. This keeps people on their toes, and this alerts leadership as to who is, to put it simply, the weak link, because that's how it goes. You are vulnerable at every point. You have to pay attention to every potential point of vulnerability.
Can you make a comment about both the cost of like a cybersecurity training as well as CSI offerings on cybersecurity training?
CSI has just recently contracted a 500-seat buy for a cybersecurity education solution with phishing through InfoSec IQ. There are other bigger solutions out there, most notably NoB4, which I think is a little bit like using an H-bomb to kill a rabbit for most of our needs. Do you really need multilingual support? I don't think we do. Do you really need all the bells and whistles and the high production costs? I mean, they basically do a soap opera for cybersecurity every week, which apparently has a big viewership. Well, that's nice. But they cost close to 3 times as much as something like InfoSec. Right now, we're just getting slowly up to speed on this. We've picked one institution that has requested it. That will be our test bed, and if that goes well, we'll be opening it out. And that may lead to further buys. I've seen pricing all over the place. CrowdStrike asks $9 per month per seat. McAfee asks $31 per seat. It's all over the place, guys. That's why I was one of the people who proposed this bulk buy, because I think that we can use our buying power in a very strategic way to really knock down these per seat costs.
And by the way, you don't have to make a decision on a product when you submit the grant. You have to make a decision on the price point. That's what you have to tell them. But truth be told, it can be adjusted. Go in the high end. Jeremy is not going anywhere. He promised us. And
well, occasionally I got to go to the bathroom, but I mean, yeah.
When you have questions, yeah, God willing, you're going to win a grant, and then you're going to have to do that. We will be there, as your the regional security directors, Jeremy. The team is there for you, and we can answer questions. In terms of antivirus endpoint protection, JCRC, we did a whole study, and we don't endorse specific products, but we went and our president is a macher at a big investment institution, and he sent over his chief information technology and security officer to advise us. And we initially, got a bid on the product they used, which was ridiculous. And, we said we couldn't afford that. So we told them we can't afford that. And they said, oh, you mean you're not this multi-trillion-dollar fund? Oh, you're a nonprofit. Here's a good price. So, it's a process. Don't think that you have to do this by next week.
Gotcha. And so first of all, Jeremy, thank you for all that. We know this is the grant getting this granular and available to everyone to do cyber stuff is amazing. We're glad that you're part of the team and knocking out those cyber assessments. Like David said, you'll be around. In the next few minutes, just want to make sure we cover a few remaining questions, but I want to also leap on what Jeremy was saying, whether it's the cyber stuff or the physical security stuff. It's all got to be maintained. It's all got to be set up on the correctly from the front end to be utilized correctly. It's not just the cyber stuff. So recognize that for any good, concrete, effective system, there's a lot of thinking that goes to it. You have to put down your written access control policy to support what your access readers will do. Who gets in, when, how, where. It's really what you got to think about, especially if you have Shabbos considerations. Does the system turn off? Is there another way to get in? Can a human be the person providing the access control so people don't have to use electronic devices? There are measures. There's so many people on this call, and there's hundreds and thousands of organizations across the country who have made it work. So it's really just about thinking about it and learning from your peers. I want to take
one more thing, Dov, I want to throw in here. For those of you who have managed service providers or external IT support that you've contracted for, these people are wonderful resources. Yeah, they're trying to sell you stuff, but at the same time, they're in the market all the time. And they will be a useful source of information for pricing, and use them. They're there. They want to serve. Yeah, they want to make a buck. Okay. But use them.
Exactly. And you know what? There are many vendors out there that, like David's example, that want to work with nonprofits and want to work with our types of organizations. When I work with a vendor, I want to make sure that the relationship is something that wants to work with me, not something that will be combative. To me, that's a no-go from the start. We're getting towards the witching hour, so I just want to make sure we get through a couple budget questions. I know there were some questions that were specific to the grant application that unfortunately wasn't the purpose of today, unless we had some extra time. We wanted to stick to budget just to stay on topic. I just want to run through a couple budgeting questions as it relates to the grant. And Ilya, if you see something that we didn't get to yet, please interject. We said one question is, can we split the cost of doors between two proposals? That's pretty straightforward. We were talking about how you can max out a project at 50 grand, right? You can get 3 grants for your location, 3 50 grand locations, but it's 50 grand max per project. So if you have more than $50,000 worth of doors, no, you cannot split it. Is there some gray area? You want to argue interior versus exterior doors? Perhaps. Personally, I don't think you will be successful in that, and doors will be, your max will be 50,000. So you could not split it amongst two applications. I'm just going to continue rolling through the questions. We're talking about those other door questions. It still sticks the same. We covered double doors and single doors. I did see a question about kind of like a panic button and lockdowns. At the end of the day, that's really an access control system. You're basically activating the lock, so that requires the electronic locks that we spoke about, the access software that enables you to remotely lock down. In an ideal security situation, the doors are locked in the first place. But if it's the sanctuary, right, people have to get in and out. They've already been approved access into the building, so that's where you're talking about the lockdown. If it's a double door, you're probably talking about mag locks, because unless you're replacing the doors entirely, mag locks are not our favorite, but that would be the best way to do a double door lockdown within the building. The threat isn't as high within necessarily. How much do mag locks with the right pulling pressure go, Ilya?
1,200 pounds should be around, I want to say $600, something like that. Could be a little bit less expensive, but yeah, that's we're talking about that.
So plus laboring, wiring, install, we're talking $2,000 a pop.
Yeah, and by the way, we're Dove said mag locks are not our favorite. We don't have time to go into why today, but consult your regional security director, and we can, and either he or Dove or Ilya can explain it in detail when you go and make the decision.
Or even better, last year on our Consultants Corner series, we spent a couple sessions on doors, door locking, and the hardware. Please refer back to that. That's why we record them. Obviously we get a lot of repetitive questions. We want to make sure it's available to you. There's a couple questions on lighting. I'm not an expert on lighting or the pricing. It can be a really wide range. Poles as well, depends on the design. Do you need to run conduit through your parking lot? Do you need to dig up your parking lot? It can be a pretty excessive project. If you have a large parking lot and need to install a lot of poles and lights and run the lines to them, I would max out your $50K budget and see where it gets you. Really, any specifics on lighting that we can help make that decision?
Well, only as it applies to pretty much any sort of purchases that you're looking to do is to be prudent about the just not putting all your eggs in one basket. So if you're looking to add 12 parking lot lights, right, maybe you could be a little bit more strategic and maybe allocate funds more appropriately to a couple of solutions instead of just buying lighting for the entire budget, and then maybe decide on where that lighting is most needed. That's just the only comment I think I will make. I mean, if you want to talk offline about how much lighting will cost, we can definitely connect with you offline.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ilya. So Ilya answered in the chat one of the important comments I saw. So thank you on kind of the procedural end of camera. So thank you. So I'm going to end on one last comment or two. First of all, there was a question about getting quotes and applying. Our understanding when DHSES ran these projects, they did not want you to get official quotes yet. It actually, right, because when you receive the award, if you're new to this grant, on the back end, there's a strict procurement policy. And you shouldn't really be, till your contract is signed, right? Signed, executed, they call it. Till you have the appropriate approvals and advertise and get the right bids, you really shouldn't be getting bids from vendors who will have to rebid. And then if they did it on the front end, they might expect it from you on the back end that you're using them. So it's better to stick with these general cost estimates, budget a little high, use a full category. Another very, very important thing, when you put in many categories, we want lighting and cameras and access and doors, and right, that's a big project to follow all the rules. You're going to be pulling your hair out and look like me by the time you're going through the project. So my personal recommendation is over budget and stick it to doing the categories correctly as you need it. If you legitimately know you only need 5 or 10 in one category, I totally understand, but many times people underestimate their cost. They don't put enough in that funds. They still have to torture themselves to do the whole bidding and procurement process per project. and it'll hurt, and it'll be a lot of work on the back end. So the last specific question I see Ilya answered about the planters, right? Ideally, again, from a high security perspective, when we're talking counterterrorism or dedicated adversary, we really want to talk about those real rated bollard systems. Now, other systems can be designed with those architectural elements, even if it's not a bollard per se, hypothetically a planter, but that's the core you want to look for. Planter itself, if it's not designed right, itself, if someone crashes into it, can shatter. It can become projectiles. Is it mounted itself, or as David likes to say, is it becoming its own battering ram? So for high security applications, planters have their place. We also have to be mindful of what your goal is, what your threat is. Did you do a vector analysis to understand? But let's say, at least for the high level bollards, right? Elliot put in for a planter, surface mounted, around $1,500 for installation. If you're talking real security rated bollards, those are coming out in the $6,000 to $8,000 full installation. They got to dig into the cement, they got to anchor them, and then you need to ring the property correctly, or at least in those vulnerable areas, so there's no gaps. So, we see people put $10,000 in for vehicular mitigation. It's not going to get you anywhere. That's definitely one of those categories. Max out your $50,000 project. And yes, bollards are very difficult in terms of city requirements, right? Thank you, Diane pointed out FEMA's requirements. But if that's where you're going to go, there's ways to do it. We've helped locations do it, but it is a lot of work. Landmarks, city zoning. I know David's been in that game a lot to help people install a real bollard program, but excuse me, like any of these programs, whether cyber, physical security, really look into those specs, understand what your vendor is offering you. And that really goes back, that dovetails to Ilya's talk last week on how to understand what is being bid on. But at this stage, just kind of those rough estimates, get it in the budget, get your application approved, and we'll go from there. That's it from my end. David, Jeremy, Ilya, any additional comments?
Nothing from me. We're sorry if we missed any of your questions. That's not our intention. So forgive us if we have skipped one or two, but please reach out to us offline if you need us, and we're happy to supply any additional information to you. And I must say, David's been doing a fantastic job together with the rest of the team, putting a lot of this information on the website. Okay, so I cannot stress it enough that you should monitor the updates on JCRC's website, because that could be the simplest way for you to get your questions answered. So, but if you can find something online, please do reach out to us. And so that's what it is. Yeah, that's it.
I'd like to once again reinforce the notion that if you're looking at things like endpoint protection, firewalls, etc., there's some wonderful resources out there. Again, specifically g2.com and Gartner.com. These guys do the surveys, they do all the assessments. They do good work, and use it.
So finally, if there are no other comments from our great team, I want to thank everyone for being here and remind you that next week, even though it is the fourth Tuesday of the month, and we usually only do this on the first and the third, we're having another special edition because, and we're going to start at 12:15 next week, and which is 15 minutes after the final deadline for the state hate crimes grants. So you'll have 15 minutes to pour yourself a drink and then settle down, because we're going to start our kickoff for the nonprofit security grant program season. So anyone who found that $50,000 wasn't enough to do your doors, these grants are for $150,000, per site. And we're going to have information posted at www.jcrcny.org/security grants. And we're working on getting material up there. Unfortunately, we won't have the state to support us next Tuesday, because Monday the feds are coming out with their guidance. We're going to read it quickly and try to digest it for you on Tuesday. But the state has more paperwork to do, so we're going to let Eric do his paperwork so that he can serve all of us as soon as possible. And we'll be here next week, and we'll be here in subsequent weeks to help you. The good news is we estimate that you will have until the third week, sometime around the third week in April, to submit. So yes, Janice, you're going to have some time to breathe. I begged FEMA to don't do it in the middle of, don't have the deadline in the middle of Pesach. So, we've accomplished something, and join us next week when we start the next cycle. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Good luck.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.